If you're a fan of Harry Potter, odds are that this scene lives rent-free in your head. I don't even have to play the audio for you to hear it in your mind. But more than just this brief moment, the entire sequence of the build-up and climax of the Sorcerer's Stone film is an iconic set of scenes, in which our three young heroes beat the odds so that Harry can confront Quirrell and protect the stone. Everything from their realization that the stone is in immediate danger, their pleading to McGonagall to help, and then the subsequent fight to overcome the obstacles in their path are just a melting pot of great storytelling that gets you hooked and your heart pounding. However, in an age where adaptations often fall short of the original story, an important question is raised. How does this sequence stack up against the original story? Well, by the end of this video, we will have uncovered every dark, hidden secret that was brushed under the rug and every difference between the movie and its book counterpart. Then, you'll be able to decide for yourself if the movie did the book justice or if it was just another botched adaptation. My name is Gibby, and yes, I got a facelift as well as a new change of clothes, but that's besides the point. Welcome to episode 15 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. This is the show where I analyze your favorite Wizarding world, movie by movie, scene by scene, and compare it to J.K. Rowling's original book series, to find every single difference along the way. Today, we're unpacking Harry, Ron, and Hermione's journey through the Hogwarts obstacles that stand between them and the Sorcerer's, or Philosopher's, Stone. We won't be getting into Harry's encounter with Quirrell and Voldemort just yet, but trust me, we've got our hands full with just these scenes today. Before we get too into it though, I wanted to shout out this commenter from a previous episode. Each week, I'll be highlighting one of my favorite comments from a past video, so be sure to share your thoughts down below when you're done watching. Plus, subscribe and stay tuned every Sunday morning for new episodes in this series. We're almost to the end of the first book, but as you know, we've still got a lot to go for the series as a whole. So join the ride and subscribe today. Per usual, I'll be covering all the changes across the four major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happened during these scenes of the film, picking up from where we left off last week with our Golden Trio finishing their detention in the Forbidden Forest. After Harry informs Ron and Hermione that Voldemort is after the stone, we cut to them walking through the outside courtyard of the castle as Harry rubs his forehead and tells them that his scar hurts again. He says that he thinks it's some type of warning and then suddenly stops in his tracks as he looks at Hagrid and has a realization. They then run off to Hagrid's hut and we see Hagrid playing the recorder, and Harry asks him what the person who gave him the dragon egg looked like. Hagrid says that he doesn't know because the man kept his hood up, but eventually Hagrid lets it slip that he told the stranger about Fluffy. Trying to convince the stranger that he could handle a dragon, Hagrid bragged about how he had a giant three-headed dog who could easily be put to sleep just by playing music. After realizing that he said this out loud to the three most annoying students at Hogwarts, he knew that he messed up, and the trio ran back off to the castle. Once again, I feel bad for Hagrid. But anyway, the trio goes into McGonagall's classroom and tells her that they know about the stone and that someone is going to steal it. They ask for Dumbledore, but she informs them that Dumbledore is gone on urgent Ministry of Magic business. They then leave the classroom and run into Snape, who says that they better go play outside or people will think that they're up to something. Harry then stares him down in a totally inconspicuous type of way, and then they devise a plan for saving the stone. We then cut to nighttime as the trio heads into the common room with the invisibility cloak, getting ready to set out on their adventure, but they are stopped short as Neville confronts them. As you know, poor Neville gets put down by Hermione's spell work, and the trio moves onward. We then see them entering Fluffy's room as the dog is already asleep, and they just barely make it through the trapdoor as the bewitched harp, which was keeping the dog asleep, had suddenly stopped playing. Fluffy then chomped at their heels as they dove through the trapdoor and fell into a strange vine-like plant that suddenly started to wrap around them. Realizing that they're dealing with Devil's Snare, Hermione said the only way to get through would be to keep still and the plant would let go. But of course, Ron kept freaking out and wouldn't calm down, which made the plant grab hold of him even more. Thankfully, after some quick thinking, Hermione saves Ron while she uses light to ward off the plant. After escaping, they move on to the third obstacle, which is the Room of Keys. The room is filled with flying keys, and they realize that only one of them will unlock the next door. The only other thing in the room is a single broomstick, which Harry then uses to snatch the key to the door and get them out. Of course, the twist is that as soon as he got on the broom, all the keys started darting after him, trying to kill him. However, thanks to Harry's fancy flying, they make it out alive. The next and final challenge they face is a massive chessboard, and Ron realizes that they must play their way across. We then witness a whole game of wizard's chess as Ron orchestrates a near-perfect victory against the other pieces, but he must sacrifice himself in the process. After saying the famous line and making the penultimate ultimate move, Harry checkmates the king and they rush to see if Ron is okay. Hermione tells Harry that she will look after Ron and that he must go on alone to save the stone. As Harry walks down the stairs to the final room, he encounters someone that he didn't expect, but that's a plot twist for next week. As for this week, I think you can tell that we already have a lot to cover. So let's jump right into things by starting with our character, timeline, and location changes. Now, I'll just get this out of the way first, which is that timeline gets a pass this week. Everything was pretty spot on with the book, as this happens right after their exams in both scenarios. But as for character and location, we've got a couple of deviations. First, for characters, the movie omits the Weasley twins and Lee Jordan from this scene. Although they aren't really involved, they're specifically mentioned in the book, which we'll get to in a minute. As for location, there's a few omissions. First is the Hog's Head. In the book, Hagrid directly mentions this location as the pub in which he received the dragon egg. Second, the lake is removed, as we see the trio in the courtyard of Hogwarts and then running to Hagrid's hut. But in the book, they go down to the lake first. And lastly, at number 3, they don't go into McGonagall's classroom as shown in the movie. But that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, as I'll address how these changes affect the plot in just a moment. Before we move forward, I just want to remind you that I can't go into every line of dialogue, because that would just take all day. So if you want to follow along with me each week and relive these awesome moments for yourself, I highly encourage picking up the audiobook. You can check my link in the description to claim your free trial of Audible, which comes with your first audiobook free. Plus, it supports the channel, so it's a win-win. Anyway, let's dive into the plot changes. As always, let's kick things off by going over Harry's narration of events in between the chapters. This is the time that J.K. Rowling takes to catch us up on anything that has taken place in the Wizarding world or at Hogwarts between the chapters. So before we get into the actual scene changes, here's a list of notable things that Harry mentions. First, Harry says that as they took their exams during the final weeks of school, he found it hard to study as he was constantly worried that Voldemort would come bursting into his classroom at any moment. He also mentions that they were given special quills that were bewitched to keep them from cheating on their tests. This obviously is a small part of the chapter and really doesn't pertain to the plot, but I like these little details that J.K. Rowling throws in here to round out the world of Hogwarts. And speaking of tests, our second change is that we do hear a few of the practical exams that they had. Harry says that Professor Flitwick had them come in one by one and make a pinecone tap dance across the desk, McGonagall had them turn a mouse into a snuff box, and Snape had them making a forgetfulness potion. Finally, at number 3, we hear about how Harry had trouble sleeping as his nightmares were getting worse, and building upon his recent trip into the forest, as now he had dreamt of a hooded figure dripping in blood. J.K. Rowling then ends this intro to the chapter and segues into their final exam in History of Magic, and the conversation that our Golden Trio has afterwards as they leave the class. This conversation is nearly identical to this start of the scene in the movie, when the trio is walking through the courtyard as Harry's scar hurts. However, there is one notable difference in terms of location, which I mentioned earlier. The trio heads down to the lake and rests under a tree with the Weasley twins and Lee Jordan tickling a giant squid in the water nearby. This is the location of their conversation about Harry's scar hurting, and then Harry's sudden aha moment about Hagrid. In the book, Ron tells Harry to relax as no one can get past Fluffy, and that Hagrid would never betray Dumbledore in a million years. This is what triggers Harry as he springs up and tells the others that they need to go see Hagrid now. Obviously in the movie, this is a more visual transition as they show Harry seeing Hagrid at his hut, and that's when he has the aha moment. This leads us perfectly into the next change, which has to do with Hagrid's involvement. It's a small change, but Hagrid isn't playing a recorder when they walk up to him. He is actually shelling peas. Obviously, this change makes a lot of sense for the movie, as it perfectly fits into the narrative of him telling them about Fluffy's weakness. I was expecting more changes with this interaction, but honestly, they got it pretty close to the book in terms of dialogue and everything else. So our next change takes us inside the castle as the trio runs off after Hagrid's tip about Fluffy. As I mentioned during the location changes, the trio doesn't go straight to McGonagall in her classroom, but they actually want to go to Dumbledore first, except nobody knows where his office is. Here's how it happens in the book. After running inside, they look around and wonder where Dumbledore's office could be. As they're panicking, McGonagall is walking by holding a stack of books. Since at this point the trio has a reputation for being mischievous, she comes up to them and asks them why they're inside. They ask her where Dumbledore is, and she tells them that he is gone and is a very important wizard, so he doesn't have time for whatever shenanigans they're up to. Harry then tells her it's about the stone, and McGonagall drops all of her books she was carrying, as she definitely wasn't expecting that. Then, very similarly to the movie, she tells them that the stone is well protected and that they shouldn't meddle in business that's not theirs. As she walks off, we have a nearly identical moment in the book to what is in the movie as Snape comes up to the trio as they're theorizing that he's going after the stone that night. The only difference is a small dialogue change. Instead of Snape saying that people might think they're up to something, he tells Harry that they should be careful not to lose Gryffindor any more points, and he adds on that if he catches them out at night again, he will personally ensure that Harry is expelled. Now we have a moment in the book that is completely removed from the film, which is the trio's first attempt at guarding the stone. That's right, before the night of them trying to get past Fluffy, they first think it's a good idea to guard the door. Right after Snape leaves them, they devise a plan for Hermione to wait outside the staff room to make sure Snape doesn't leave it. Harry and Ron tell her that she's the perfect one to do this because she can just tell the professors that she's searching for Flitwick to ask him a question about exams. Hermione reluctantly agrees to be the watchdog, and then Ron and Harry head to the third floor corridor, where none other than McGonagall catches them. Obviously, she must have thought that they would try something and went that direction. After she catches them, she tells them very angrily that if she sees them anywhere near this door again, she'll take another 50 points from Gryffindor. The boys then head back to the Gryffindor common room, hopeful that at least Hermione is keeping an eye on Snape. Sadly, this hope is quickly squashed as Hermione bursts through the portrait hole saying that she just barely escaped after Snape found her lurking outside of the teacher's room. And now our trio is left with no other option. Okay, so before we jump into their nighttime escapade and the remainder of this thrilling chapter as the trio navigates each obstacle guarding the stone, I want to mention one bit of dialogue that I think is pretty key for Harry's development. Sadly, it's cut from the film, but in the book, it's quite impactful. After Hermione returns to the common room, Harry tells them that he has no other choice than to go after the stone himself and take it before Snape does. Hermione and Ron then tell him that he's obviously being ridiculous, but then Harry goes on a mini tirade telling them about how they don't understand the magnitude of the situation. Exams won't matter. House points in the House Cup won't matter. Getting expelled won't matter if Voldemort returns. If Voldemort returns, they'll be lucky just to survive. Harry tells them that he'll never turn to the dark side, and he ends the monologue by saying, "Voldemort killed my parents, remember?" This is almost a final release of all the pent-up emotion that Harry has been holding on to all school year, as he has had recurring nightmares of his parents dying every single night. I really wish that they would have had a short moment like this in the movie. Perhaps the director saw this as too big of a moment for a child actor to communicate on screen, but in the book, you really feel Harry's emotion, as he's showing his true Gryffindor colors even at such a young age. After this rousing speech, Ron and Hermione are convinced and tell him that they're going too. And after Harry tells them that they'll get expelled as well, Hermione says that Flitwick told her in secret she got 112% on her exam. She then remarks that they won't be able to kick her out after that. And on that lighthearted note, we prepare for the stone heist of the century. Now, I know a lot of you probably think that the next change will have to do with Neville, but they actually got that pretty similar to the book. Sad that it's the part that he gets a spell cast on him, but oh well. The next change actually comes as the trio is heading towards the third floor room while under the invisibility cloak. And guess what? Our favorite poltergeist is back. That's right, after a few weeks of him not being included in the chapters, we finally hear from Peeves again. I gotta say, I kinda missed him. Anyway, in the book, Peeves is floating down the hall and senses that someone is invisible near him. He asks if it's a ghosty, ghoulie, or student beastie, and then threatens to call Filch. Thankfully, Harry is quick on his feet and impersonates the Bloody Baron, who is the only person Peeves is afraid of. Harry tells Peeves in a hoarse whisper that the Bloody Baron has his own reasons for being invisible, and then instructs him to stay away from this area tonight as the Baron has business here. Peeves then immediately cowers down and apologizes profusely to the invisible entity, believing it to be the Baron. I think this is a brief funny moment, but obviously Peeves is completely removed from all the films, so this part was omitted. Next, the trio gets to Fluffy's room, and we have our first change in regard to their journey through the Hogwarts obstacles. Fluffy is up first, and they handle the situation quite differently to what the movie shows. In the movie, there is a harp playing music and Fluffy is asleep, but in the book, the dog is actually awake when they get into the room. There is a harp there, but it's not playing music, and the trio has their own plan to get past the dog. This brings us to the next change, which is that Harry brings Hagrid's flute with him. No, not the one you see in the movie, the one he got for Christmas from Hagrid. Although it didn't sound great, Harry played some notes and Fluffy's eyelids slowly closed and the dog fell asleep. After opening up the trapdoor, Ron told them that it was completely dark and he didn't know what was down there. Harry then volunteered to go first, and after passing off flute duty to Hermione, he jumped in. After falling for a few seconds, he finally landed softly on something. Then he yelled up and Ron and Hermione followed. Now that we've gone past the first obstacle, we need to address the changes made to their encounter with this new challenge, Devil's Snare. There are quite a lot of changes with this one, so bear with me. First, Hermione doesn't get trapped. After she lands, she quickly realizes what the plant is and hurries out of it and off to the side before it can grab hold of her. Of course, the boys, who were oblivious to the plant, didn't realize it had firmly wrapped around them. Second, they don't fall through the plant by holding still. In fact, this is completely made up. As I mentioned, Hermione is already free and off to the side, but the boys need help getting out. Which brings us to our third change, as the movie shows Ron being the only one who gets stuck. And fourth, in the movie, he continues to panic and act like a fool, which in the book is totally not the case, as holding still doesn't fend off the plant. So Harry and Ron were stuck there regardless in the book. Sadly, this is another instance of the movie painting Ron like the idiot of the group, when that totally wasn't the case in the book. The fifth and final change for this obstacle is that the plant isn't fended off by Hermione using light. Just like in the movie, Hermione has to think of what Professor Sprout said about Devil's Snare. However, unlike the movie, it is actually fire that is the plant's downfall. It's kind of a funny interaction in the book, because right after Hermione says that Devil's Snare likes the dark and damp, Harry quickly says, "So light a fire." Then Hermione says, "Of course, but there's no wood." Then Ron, in typical Ron fashion, shouts at her, "Have you gone mad? Are you a witch or not?" This obviously is very different from the film for all the reasons I've already listed. But this back and forth dialogue is funny, as Hermione, despite her genius, forgets that she can literally light a fire with her wand. Now that the trio has made it past the second obstacle, we come to another challenge which is represented in the movie, and that is the Room of Keys. However, the key difference here, see what I did there, is that all three of them grab a broomstick and together they chase down the key to unlock the door. Oh, and another change is that all the keys don't chase after Harry. Anyway, I'm sure this is the moment you've all been waiting for. The chess match. All in all, this scene is quite similar to the movie with just a few detailed exceptions. One of them being that Ron goes up to a chess piece, touches it, causing it to come alive, and then asks it if they need to play to get across the board. Other than that, the game is very similar. The ending is the primary thing that's changed, and it's quite different. I'm sorry to crush some of you by saying this, but Ron's most iconic line is made up. Ron does sacrifice himself so Harry can win, but he never says, "Not me, not Hermione, you." But this does bring us to the next change in regard to the end of this chess game, because there's a reason that he doesn't say that line. And the reason is that Hermione goes on with Harry. That's right, she doesn't stay behind with an injured Ron like in the movie. In the book, they finish the game and then just leave Ron in the pile of dead pieces. Honestly, there's no indication that Ron is alive at this point, so the two of them move on with Harry trying to convince himself that his best friend isn't dead. I guess that's real commitment to the cause. Now, the reason that Hermione moves on with Harry in the book is because there's still one more protection in place before they get to the stone. In the book, Harry and Hermione count through the obstacles they've faced and realize that they still have Snape's left. In the movie, Harry meets Quirrell right after the chess match, so this next moment isn't so much a change as it is just a complete omission. You see, as they head into the next chamber, purple fire springs up behind them and black fire in front of them, blocking their path. The only other thing in the room is a piece of parchment with writing on it and a table of potions. I can't read the entire riddle as it's quite long, but essentially the riddle on the piece of parchment tells the reader which potion they must drink to make it through the fires. One of the 7 potions will let them through the black fire to move forward, and another one of the 7 will lead them through the purple fire to go backward. Thankfully, Hermione puts her brains to work and quickly figures out the riddle. But the issue is that the potion to go forward is only enough to get one person through. This is when we finally have the conversation they show in the movie after Ron sacrifices himself. Harry tells Hermione to drink the potion which will let her go back, and he instructs her to get Ron, take 2 brooms from the key room, and head to the Owlry to send word to Dumbledore. He tells her that he'll go on alone and hold off Snape as long as he can. Then the chapter ends with Harry drinking the potion and pressing on through the fire to face his enemy. Little does he know, though, that his enemy isn't who he thinks it is, and the chapter abruptly cuts off on this cliffhanger. So I almost need to catch my breath after all those changes. And I gotta say that the book is quite different from the movie. Almost entirely different, with the changes in each obstacle and even the removal of an entire obstacle itself. This is especially strange, and I'm sure they filmed scenes doing Snape's puzzle, but ultimately cut it for time. However, out of all the obstacles, it's crazy to me that they would have chosen to cut Snape's, as literally earlier in the movie and in the book, they make a point of having Hagrid tell the trio that Snape is one of the professors guarding the stone. so why would he steal it? It's kind of ironic to me that the one obstacle they remove is Snape's when it's so integral to the plot. Anyway, enough of me. What do you think? To go back to our original question, does this movie version stack up properly against the book version? I know they don't have to be identical, as it's typically impossible to do so, but do you think that these changes did the story justice? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.